My guest in the Nimataion today is Marcus McCoy, and together we are spinning a yarn. Marcus, you're a blacksmith, occultist, I might say, and I'm happy to have you on the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
What has been your favorite childhood story, Marcus?
Well, let's see. I think I'd say like stories of King Arthur were probably some of the earlier, most influential ones, like the um it certainly opened up a my imagination to the past, but also there's a tremendous amount of depth to the King Arthur stories and Excalibur, Merlin, all these things. And there's been so many renditions of it over the years, but I mean, it's definitely something that's captured um, Western uh, occult practices and paganism as well. So I would say that was like one of the earlier ones that really had a big impact on me. And I think it probably does a lot of people. Like yeah, I
Of
mean
course.
it's pretty epic.
Yeah. So, um, of course, your first word you mentioned was Excalibur,
Mm,
the
yeah,
magical sword. And
yeah.
was it this element foremost in the stories, or what was
Well, I
the
think that
what captivated you the most?
well, I mean, magic, Merlin really, captured me, quite a bit. Like King Arthur just kind of seemed like a, a dumbass in some ways, like uh slave to his passions and just, like influenced negatively by power, and then having to go through a process of redemption. I mean, these are common within like the hero's journey, like sort of stories like throughout history, and I have a degree in transpersonal anthropology, like I've studied a lot of storytelling traditions and a lot of stories that are analogous to that. But I think, uh, yeah, Merlin was one of the things that really fascinated me. And also, the sword is a huge symbol, and I recently had a psychedelic experience where I just contemplated the sword. I mean, that was really just like kind of like what came in. Um, it became like an obsession during that experience, and the 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 level of depth of meaning that goes with swords and blades is rather mind-boggling uh to me still, to this moment, like I'm sort of blown away by it all, just in contemplating um its symbolism throughout history. uh there are mysteries that revolve around it that are mind-blowing. And I think the concept of a magic sword, like, or a magical blade in general, is something that also captures a lot of people's imaginations. I mean, it's still a focal point for a lot of people's practices. They need to have a magical knife. They need to have a magical blade for their practice. And you see that both within pagan uh, communities as well as like lodge magic and Western occultists and even people doing proto shamanic like practices and things, like the knife is a big thing,
Yeah.
like um but like the mysteries of what makes a knife magical, it became kind of an obsession as I became older.
Mhm.
Like what makes a thing uh imbued with magic power, you know like that became something that was interesting to me. And I think that there's a an intersection between and there's a thing to contemplate there too, like with the relationship between matter and spirit. Like there's this Cartesian dualism that we unknowingly explore whenever we had, like approach the subject of magical objects. and magical objects aren't necessarily objects. I think a lot of people believe that they're imbued with a life of their own after a certain point as well. Like I personally have experienced and believe that if it's not moving your hand, is it even magical? You
That's a
know,
great,
like,
yeah.
I mean, and where it's actually like a felt thing, like I hold on to a blade, here's one I made,
Mm.
and if it's not like holding on to like a bird,
Hmm.
like where it's like moving your hand, then is it even does it even have a magical life,
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
know? So like Excalibur, like really inspired that had like a magical life to it, like it and all the stories that becomes like the epicenter, like the magical sword is what made the king. It's what, caused all these things to happen. And contemplating that, like that one thing and the importance of it. And then also it's, towards the end of the story, it's loss, like where, it was like um given back to the Lady of the Lake, or there's variations of the story, like different endings and things like that. But it's it's really fascinating to me, like what that means to the world as a whole, like when like um mankind is given this magical gift and then it's returned, we don't have it anymore, like are we lost? you know and I think, and I couldn't help but feel like from a child on that without it we were lost as a species. And I'd look around us and stuff and I'd see like the lack of magic in the world, and I think a lot of people may feel that way too. And so maybe the I have to stop and ponder, whether or not the seeking to get a magical blade in their own lives is actually part of that, re-enchantment of the world, or regaining it, like, and also finding mastery of oneself in the world, So
Yeah.
yeah.
And I mean, of course, in many parts of the world, smiths are considered equal to shamans. They
Yeah,
were
they're one.
sorcerers. They had they could imbue blades or their other objects with magic. And I mean,
Yeah.
that's what you do at Troll Cunning Forge, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's the
Can you
study of
convey how
how
you
it's the
imbue
study of
your
how
object?
they did that became a really important thing to me,
Mm,
like in it. Um, like a couple of years ago, working with Johannes Bjorn Garsbeck, like he taught me something. He's actually an amazing wealth of blacksmith folk magic lore, and in general, like all kinds of magical lore. Um, but he shared with me some really amazing practices that were done in uh, Scandinavian cultures in terms of imbuing magical items. And I think that the one thing that I like about Johannes is that he actually understands it because he's been practicing it for a long time. So it's not just, textbook for him. So like the subtext, and the context for how and why, these things are imbued with power aren't lost on him like they are with some other authors that have talked about certain subjects. So it's like of like so learning how to like have something made by the dwarves, for example, or having something made by the devil.
yeah.
Yeah. Right.
So,
Yeah.
can you reveal one of your secrets, how you imbue your smithing objects with magic, or is this a trick of the trade?
Well, you know, I actually like realized how it was done, because the grimoires talk about how to do it. I mean, it's already in the grimoires, like within the grimoire tradition, there's all these grimoires that tell you how to, like make your magical tools, right? And a lot of people just follow those formulas, even though the grimoires have variations in how to do it, different quenches, different times, astrological times, things like that. But I also studied laboratory alchemy with Robert Bartlett, and he helped me to understand. I had this kind of aha moment while taking one of his classes where I realized that this was an alchemical process
Mhm.
that was being done.
Mhm.
And so I, when I realized that, I was like, well, now I don't need to follow a recipe. Now I can cook. I can create my own formulas, my own recipes, things like that, because I understand it. So I would say I would lead people towards that, like anything I say just gets imitated without insight.
Yes.
And so like that has been frustrating to me over the years. There's a lot of people that just want to reproduce what I do as a gimmick,
Mm.
and or like there's even people that have written papers about what I do without understanding what I do and published them in publications, and that blows my mind as well. So um I I don't understand it. So the the there's the Western grimoire traditions and their ways, and that revolves around quenching and quenching times and things like that astrologically. But then there's also that's just that within that tradition. That also like Western alchemy pulls from a lot of folklore and regionalized folklore.
Mm.
And regionalized folklore also has relationships, like telephone game style, spreading of information between, cultures in Europe. And but there are some that are isolated and just to a certain thing or certain, culture. One of the interesting ones is you got to make it naked.
Ah,
You
aye.
just got to forge it naked.
Uh-huh.
And I tell you what, that is not something I want to do.
Not only the heat, but also the sparks.
No, yeah, the sparks, a modern blacksmith shop with modern tools and things like that is just so exceptionally dangerous.
Mm.
And there's just so many things that you just don't want to be around naked.
Mm.
um, while you're making a knife. You just don't want to do it. And I don't know if that's essential, but I mean, it was a thing in quite a few cultures. In some cultures, like your knife has to be made by nine naked blacksmiths in like at midnight or, different things. I mean, there's a lot of different traditions with that. But there's a lot of different ways. And so that's the thing is that the more we study the folklore and the more that folklore is being studied. Well, right now we're at a period of time, and you probably know this because you focus on stories, like is that we're at a time where um it's become very in vogue for people to basically strip mine cultures of their stories and folklore. And a lot of times they don't even give credit where it's due, like where did this come from? They just regurgitate it as if they were the source themselves. And I think there's a lot of conferences and books like where people are doing this right now. And I'd really like to discourage that. Like I think that folklorists and people that study history and things like that, they are also like sort of adding in their own poesis to the process that they're bringing something new from what was done before and what they've learned, some insight and stuff like that. I really see that lacking, which I don't know if you do as well.
Yeah, I mean, wh I think the common denominator of what you told is uh, be there planetary hours or being naked or so. The common denominator is they are stories,
Mhm.
and so stories are what's making objects magical in a way.
Yeah. I mean, there is that hypothesis as well, like in terms of like, if the story is good enough,
Mhm. Yeah.
like it lends a power to it, like what
Yes.
is our story? What's our narrative in terms
Yeah.
of like what makes something magical. And there's going to be cross-cultural, like examples, like where that bridge, like stories, where you're like, ah, well, that's a similarity,
Mm.
like you know, there's dragons in almost every part of the world.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
You know
yeah.
what I
And
mean?
and magical blades. And I mean,
Yeah.
Excalibur is one of the finest examples. So
Yeah.
that's a very good story, and that's brought you where you are here today, together
Yes,
with Merlin. And
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, so the circle is closed, and the sword is being cast back into the lake.
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you for sharing that with us, Marcus. It has
Oh,
been
and thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm about to leave the house and make some magical blades today. Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah.
See you soon, and have fun. Bye bye.
Yes.
The world is
Happy
magic.
storytelling. Cheers.